Long ago, in a land of dusty deserts and wandering herds, there lived a woman named Sarah. Sarah was married to a good man named Abraham. They were very happy together, but they had one deep sadness. They had no children. When Sarah was young, she would look at other families and dream of holding her own baby. But the years passed and no child came. Sarah and Abraham grew older and older. Their hair turned gray and their bodies grew tired. Sarah folded away the tiny blankets she had once made with hope. She stopped speaking of children altogether. It hurt too much to hope. Then something extraordinary happened. God spoke to Abraham. He made a promise so big it was hard to even imagine. God promised that Abraham would be the father of a great nation. He said his family would be more numerous than the stars in the night sky. When Abraham told Sarah about this promise, she felt a tiny spark inside her heart. But she looked at her wrinkled hands and she looked at Abraham's old face, and the spark faded. How could this be? They were far too old. So they waited. They traveled to a new land because God told them to. They built a new life. Still, no child came. Sarah watched the seasons change, year after year after year. The promise began to feel like a story they told each other to feel better. A beautiful, impossible story. Sarah's heart, which had once ached, now felt still and quiet, like an empty room. She believed in God, but she could not believe this one thing could ever happen for her. Not now. It was simply too late. One very hot day, when the sun beat down on their tents, Abraham was sitting at the entrance looking for shade. He looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. Abraham did something very important. He ran to them and bowed. He welcomed them as honored guests because that was the right thing to do. He did not know yet who they really were. He hurried to Sarah and said, "Bake some good bread." He ran to his herd and picked a fine, tender calf for a servant to prepare. He brought the guests curds and milk and the roasted meat, and they ate under the trees. As they were eating, one of the visitors spoke. He asked where Sarah was. Abraham said, "She is in the tent." Then the visitor, who was actually the Lord, said something that made time stand still. He said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Sarah was listening just inside the flap of the tent. When she heard these words, her breath caught. Her old heart thumped in her chest. Without thinking, a sound bubbled up inside her and escaped her lips. It was a quiet, dry laugh, a laugh of pure disbelief. She thought to herself, "How could this be? After all this time, I am worn out and my husband is old. This cannot be a pleasure for me now. It is too impossible." Then the voice of the Lord spoke to Abraham. He said, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now that I am old?'" Then he asked the most important question in the whole world. "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Sarah heard this, and she was afraid. She came out of the tent and she said, "I did not laugh." But the Lord looked at her with kindness that saw everything, and he said, "Yes, you did laugh." Sarah thought about that question for many days and nights. Is anything too hard for the Lord? The words echoed in her mind. She looked at the stars Abraham talked about. She remembered the promise. Something began to change inside her. It was not a sudden feeling, but a slow turning, like a desert flower after a rare rain. Her laugh, which had been a laugh of doubt, began to feel different in her memory. It was the moment her impossible situation met God's powerful promise. The Lord had said he would return. Sarah decided she would wait and see. She would hold that promise carefully in her heart. She stopped folding her arms in resignation. She started looking at the world with new eyes. The months passed. Sarah began to feel strange in her body. Changes were happening that should not happen for a woman her age. A fluttering where there had been only stillness, a swelling where there had been only flatness. It was true. The impossible was growing inside her. God was keeping his word just as he said he would. He did what he promised at the very time he had appointed. When the baby was born, Sarah's joy was so big it filled the whole tent. Abraham named their son Isaac, which means he laughs. Sarah cradled her baby boy, and her tears were tears of pure happiness. She said, "God has brought me laughter. Everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." Her laughter was no longer the sound of doubt. It was the sound of joy. It was the sound of a promise kept. It was the sound of God's perfect timing being right, even when it seemed so very wrong. Sarah's story did not end with Isaac's birth. That laughter became the foundation of a family that would change the world. Isaac grew up loved and cherished, the child of a promise made real. He would become the father of Jacob, who was also called Israel. From Jacob would come 12 sons, the fathers of the 12 tribes of a great nation. Sarah got to hold her promise in her arms. She got to sing him lullabies and watch him take his first steps. She saw the starry promise begin in her own tent. Her story teaches us something very important about God. God's plans are not like our plans. His clock is not like our clock. We look at our lives and we see what is possible or impossible right now. God sees the whole story from beginning to end. Sarah thought her time had passed, but in God's plan, her time was perfect. Her laughter reminds us that when we face situations that seem hopeless and timing that seems all wrong, we can remember her. We can remember that God asks us the same question he asked her: "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Sarah's life tells us the answer is a joyful no. Nothing is too hard for him. Her story is kept in the Bible to give hope to anyone who has ever waited for something until their heart hurt. It tells us that God's promises are true, and his timing, even when it seems so impossible, is always, always right.